Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 17. As it turned out, I did see them before they saw me, but that didn't materially help my situation. There were a lot more of them than there were of me. Being small and relatively quiet, I was able to work my way on through the maze before they began searching for me in any sort of logical pattern. When they did start a formal search, they had people positioned to cut off all escape, so I retreated to a custodial closet and waited. In many ways, my situation was academic. My CAW-2K, for which I had 2 full clips left, really was too light to pop through their heavy armor. Apparently, Yojimbo and his crew had done enough damage to Dark Legion forces here on Luna that they got very serious about arming and armoring themselves. Well, they had little training. Even an idiot could hold his finger down on a trigger, and with a dozen or so of them out there, the law of averages said I'd lose to a bullet or 2 before the night was out. If I'd had phase explosives, I might have been able to do something that would deal with more of the enemy all at once. Nice little ball of Semtech studded with nails and screws on the shelf beside the door would have worked nicely against the heretics. Unfortunately for me, I had no Semtech, and even using the powder from all the shells I had for my guns would only produce a minor bang. I looked around and shook my head. Having a 2-meter deep, 1.5 meters wide, and 3-meter tall janitor's closet for my mausoleum just didn't sit well. While it was true that I had an eternity's worth of polish for my casket, and enough wax and other things to keep the whole vault spick and span, I'd never been much for housework, and I doubted that after being dead, I'd take to it much. I knew that to have been true for the first time around. After all, I left Miss Wickersham to clean up my apartment after the second fugue. Something clicked in the back of my head, and I dug for Ash's core. Holding the IR sensor up to my eye, I interrogated the unit about the chemistry involved in turning common household cleaning agents into lethal weapons. Ash cheerfully started downloading material into my computer, and under his able tutelage, I managed to construct all sorts of fun stuff, from Mishima's finest Hogasho furniture polish, Capital's Dranex, and Capital's Mr. Keen cleaning and solvent solution. I knew I was working with limited time because someone among the heretics would figure out that the Chargers had been shooting at something, giving off RF mods. Since the cannons had shot up some heretics, someone was bound to conclude that whatever the guns had been shooting at had gotten behind the heretics. The presence of my bloody footprints heading away from the scene would let them know the target was still ambulatory. That meant someone would find an RF mod scanner and track me. I put together the most explosive mixtures possible and sealed them tightly in aluminum floor wax canisters. I had enough to fill 3 of them, and all 3 stood upright in a galvanized tin bucket. Around them I packed a number of mop heads, and I sprinkled nails and screws liberally through their threads. I soaked the mop tops down with flammable liquids, tied the bucket's handle to a regular mop, and got everything in position for my weight. My attack definitely had to be a counterpunch. Of course, the only problem with a counterpunch is that you have to be hit first before you can throw it. The fact that my opposition was not made up of professionals saved me. From what they said in the corridor outside my little stronghold, they did have an RF mod scanner. "We know you're in there. Come out now with your hands up, or else. This is your last chance." It was my only chance. I remained silent. They opened fire, Every single one of them put as much fire through the door to the closet as his gun would kick out. The fiberglass door exploded into dust thick enough to walk on. The bullets that had torn it apart continued unabated and gnawed their way through the closet's back plasterboard wall and ricocheted through the conference room behind it. The firing became more sporadic as heretics paused and reloaded, then burned second and third clips. Finally, someone shouted at them to stop firing. With only 2 clips to my name, I found their profligate expenditure of bullets rather offensive. But I was also pleased that they thought me deadly enough to warrant such overwhelming firepower.
Reload, reload.
I don't see anything.
After all that shooting, there isn't going to be anything to see.
Serve him right for what he did to Epsilon Team.
Let's check it out.
Careful.
Of what? He'd have to be invulnerable to have survived that.
Invulnerable, or aware of a little flaw in the way people tend to think. Seldom do people look up above eye level. I don't know why. I just know it must be true, because when being trained as an agent for Cybertronic, I was taught to break that habit. Without training, I felt certain the heretics would still have it. Actually, I had to hope they still had it, which is why I climbed up and wedged myself in the upper corner of the closet, above the door. The heretics, imagining me cowering in the back corner of the room, had filled the closet with bullets from the 2-meter height of the door down. Only 1 or 2 had let bullets get away from them, but those shots missed me by at least 3 centimeters. So I knew I'd chosen right. They'd given it their best shot. Now I got to counterpunch. I brought my right hand forward, and it pulled the mop bucket from the top closet shelf. It swung down perfectly, despite being an awkward and unusual-looking pendulum. When I felt the mop handle hit the top of the door, I let it go and spin out in the corridor. Without waiting to hear their reactions to the bucket and stick flying through their midst, I dropped from the ceiling and filled my right hand with the Punisher. My gun came up as all of them turned to watch the flying bomb. 1 of 2 had begun to swing their guns in line with the bucket, but they didn't get a shot off before my finger twitched on the trigger. In fact, the closest one of them got to shooting it was getting a burst off into the man across the way from him as my slug hit the bucket and exploded the wax canisters. The makeshift bomb's detonation was crude, and its blast radius was small, but the fiery explosion served its purpose well. Heretics reeled away with pieces of burning mop strung over them like incendiary spaghetti. The nails and screws that didn't pierce armor got underfoot and acted like ball bearings to trip the scattering heretics. Their screams and blind flailing about filled the corridor with chaos. Moving in and among them, I stuffed my Punisher into armpits and other chinks in their armor and dispatched the heretics who could still do harm. A shot up under a chin here or into the hip joint there, and I disabled the last of the ambulatory heretics. From one of them, I appropriated an ammo belt with reloads for my CAW-2K, and found nestled among the shells a grenade. Running up the corridor to the north, I tossed the grenade back behind me and trusted it to discourage pursuit. Further along the corridor, I came to an area we had identified as staff quarters and likely housing for the heretics. Deciding they'd not expect me to trap myself in their den, I cut into it. Even though it got me no closer to the elevators, I had hope I might be able to crack whatever they had for an armory and possibly appropriate better armor. In fact, if I were able to disguise myself as one of them, I might be able to get clear much more easily. A cursory search of their quarters confirmed that the heretics had been stationed here. The suite's large common room had been ringed with double bunks. One of the rooms off the common area had doors open and appeared at a glance to have been housing one of their commanders and the Razid. I kicked a third door open and found the armory. It had only bits and pieces of armor. but I did find an Imperial Assailant sniper rifle. With the stock closed, it wasn't much longer than my CAW-2K, so I took it and some clips because it would punch through even the heaviest armor. Moving past the kitchenette, I approached the last door of the common room. It had 2 locks, both of which were new, so I knew something special had to reside behind it. Given the size of the complex and the fact that we hadn't seen enough folks going in and out to even guess at a garrison force of 24. I wondered if it didn't lead to some secret passage up to ground level of Fernarius Sink. Using my Punisher lockpick, I had the door open in short order. A musky, cold breeze blew out of the dark room beyond the doorway. Shifting over to IR and UV vision didn't get me anything. The flat, matte black of the interior seemed to greedily suck up all the electromagnetic radiation. The only light I got came through the doorway, and despite the fact that leaving it open would leave an obvious clue to where I had gone, I didn't want to close it. This room had been shaped out of lunar bedrock. I normally would have said carved from the moon's cold flesh, but I saw no evidence of tool scars or drill marks on the tenebrous stone surfaces. Part of me wanted to think acid had been used to etch the odd shapes and imposing forms from the stone, but another part of me was afraid that this place had been here since the time it was formed out of molten lunar rock. The surface architect of Luna itself is industrial Gothic. It towers over the people, with its sheer mass giving it legitimacy. The clean lines mark mechanical precision, and the shapes celebrate the incredible array of tools man has created in conquering his universe. The towers given rise to heights that trap the dirty brown ball that is Earth as it courses through the sky, making it a jewel in the crown that marks the apex of man's achievement, the reshaping of his home world into something he can no longer inhabit. This room's architect was different. It struck me as funereal Gothic because the shapes loomed and were oppressive, but the symbolism had been taken from death and horrors worse than death. Mind-twisting creatures and tortured beings knitted their limbs and bodies together in double helix arches. Stalactite corpses hung from the overhead, their feet visible in the light, but their bloated faces nothing more than swollen shadows in the vaults. The obsidian floor glistened like black ice, and if I looked at it very long, I saw faces of people frozen beneath it. Their eyes bugged out and cheeks bulged as they fought for air in the stone void beneath my feet. I didn't know what this place was, but I found it evil and perversely comforting. I tried to tell myself I took comfort in it because I knew none of the heretics would willingly tread into this unholy desecratorium. But I knew that that was not it. Part of me was familiar with this place. Part of me had come home again. I caught movement in the corner of my eye and turned toward it as I brought the assailant up. I stared at my own image in a black mirror. A snarl stole the humanity of my expression. But even as my face softened into a smile, I saw the fierce mask of my reflection stay the same. I approached the mirror and saw new images of me, with my face becoming more puzzled and then horrified. Each new image dwarfed and engulfed the old ones, and yet the old images remained there, faintly. They hovered like a legion of revenants, waiting to rend the new image. The mirror did not report the new image accurately, though I stood with my nose so close to the glass that my breath left fog on it. The image it showed was 2 inches taller than me. I saw a man who looked like me, though he stood taller and wore his hair in one of those shaved side cuts popular among Capital's elite. His face resembled mine, yet showed an innocence I had never ever dreamed of possessing. In his eyes I saw myself, and felt curiosity running in tandem with anger. Why anger? I asked him. Because now you have destroyed us both. Suddenly his pink flesh swelled up and burst like a flesh balloon. In its place, with bits of gore splattered over it, a creature grew up to tower over me. His robes were a riot of color and images, all clashing and shifting, with the only discernible pattern being that which would do maximum violence to my eyes. Skinny arms extended beyond the sleeves, and ended in sensuously slender hands and fingers. The claws on each finger curved inward, delicately, and glistened with a venom that I knew to be distilled delirium. Looking up, I saw his head as he looked down at me. Fat white corpse worms moved in and out through his skull. A worm displaced an eye and crawled across his pale brow to burrow into the creature's ear. Yet the creature seemed to take no notice. Instead of striking at the offending worm, the creature's hand played with the barbed chain that girded its waist and plucked an imagined imperfection in its garment. The creature opened its mouth, and a worm functioned as its tongue.
We are Muad'Dib, he who is known as the Lord of Visions. We have a bond.
I tried to move back, to move away, but I could not. No, I have no bond with you.
Oh, you do, Quentin Kell. A very strong bond.
Muad'Dib's eyes half closed, as if he regretted something. It was a useful bond, but no more. The worm that was his tongue lunged forward and passed through the mirror, as if passing through the flesh of a soap bubble. The glass clung to it, wreathing it in a writhing corona of light, reflected from Muad'Dib's robe.
A useful bond, but one we shall now sever.
I felt the worm's cold kiss on my brow. Then the universe imploded and left me alone with all the fear I had ever known in both of my lifetimes. Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 17,